I always imagined the moment I'd ask my son about his wedding would be filled with laughter, maybe a little teasing, and the kind of warmth that only comes from family. I pictured myself fussing over flower arrangements, helping him pick out a suit, and maybe even shedding a tear or two as he walked down the aisle. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I actually asked, "So, when's the big day?" And my daughter-in-law, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, replied, "We got married yesterday." For a heartbeat, I thought she was joking. I waited for the punchline, for my son to chime in with his usual grin and say, "Just kidding, Mom." But the silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked from her to my son, searching for any sign that this was all some elaborate prank. But there was only awkwardness, a strange tension in the air that made my skin prickle. I felt the world tilt beneath me. How could they have done this without telling me? Without telling any of us? I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it wouldn't budge. My mind raced with questions, each one sharper than the last. Was it something I did? Something I said? Or was there a secret, something hidden, that made them shut me out? I could feel the betrayal settling in, cold and heavy. Why would my own son keep something so important from me? What could possibly be so terrible, so urgent, that they'd choose secrecy over family? And if this is just the beginning, what else don't I know? My name is Linda, and if you ask anyone who knows me, they'll tell you I'm the kind of mother who lives for her family. I grew up in a small town where Sunday dinners were sacred. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes, and every milestone, no matter how small, was marked with hugs, laughter, and sometimes a few happy tears. My own parents taught me that family is everything, and I carried that lesson with me into adulthood, pouring my heart into raising my son, Daniel. From the moment Daniel was born, he became the center of my world. I remember the first time I held him, his tiny fingers curling around mine, and I promised myself I'd always be there for him. Through scraped knees, school plays, heartbreaks, and triumphs, I was his biggest cheerleader. We had our own little rituals, pancake breakfasts on Saturdays, movie nights with popcorn, and long walks where we'd talk about everything and nothing. Even as he grew older and life got busier, we always found our way back to each other. When Daniel introduced me to Emily, I felt a flutter of hope. She was warm, intelligent, and had a quiet strength about her that reminded me of myself at her age. I saw the way Daniel looked at her, the way his eyes softened and his laughter came a little easier. It didn't take long for me to start picturing her as part of our family. I imagined holidays with her at the table, sharing stories and traditions, maybe even teaching her how to make my mother's famous apple pie. I wanted her to feel at home with us, to know that she was welcome and loved. Family traditions mean everything to me. Every Christmas, we decorate the tree together, each ornament holding a memory from years past. On Thanksgiving, we go around the table and share what we're grateful for, even if it means wiping away a few tears. Weddings, though, weddings are the crown jewel of our family celebrations. I still remember my own wedding day, the way my mother fussed over my dress, the laughter that echoed through the house, the feeling of being surrounded by everyone who mattered most. I wanted that for Daniel and Emily. I wanted to help plan the perfect day, to see them exchange vows in front of friends and family, to dance with my son at the reception and toast to their future. I'd already started dreaming about the details. I pictured Emily in a simple, elegant gown, Daniel looking nervous but happy at the altar. I imagined the church filled with flowers, the reception hall buzzing with excitement, and the two of them beaming as they cut their wedding cake. I thought about the speeches, the first dance, the way our families would come together to celebrate their love. I even started a little notebook, jotting down ideas for venues, color schemes, and songs that would make the day unforgettable. But it wasn't just about the party. It was about the meaning behind it all, the joining of two families, the promise of a new beginning, the chance to create memories that would last a lifetime. I wanted to give Daniel and Emily the kind of wedding that would set the tone for their marriage, joyful, loving, and full of hope. I wanted to be there for every moment, to support them, to share in their happiness. Looking back, maybe I was a little too eager, a little too involved. But it all came from a place of love. I wanted the best for my son, and I wanted Emily to know she was gaining not just a husband, but a whole family who would stand by her side. I never imagined, not for a second, that they would choose to do it all without us, that they would trade the warmth and chaos of a family wedding for something secret and silent. Now, as I replay those dreams in my mind, I feel the ache of what could have been. The empty space where memories should have been made, the silence where laughter should have echoed, and I can't help but wonder, where did I go wrong? What did I miss? And how do I move forward when everything I hoped for has been swept away in a single stunning moment? It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that slips by unnoticed, tucked between the busyness of work and the comfort of routine. I'd invited Daniel and Emily over for dinner, nothing fancy, just my homemade lasagna, a salad, and the promise of a quiet evening together. I set the table with the good dishes, lit a few candles, and even put on the playlist Daniel loved as a child, hoping to create a little magic, a little warmth. I wanted them to feel at home, to know that no matter how grown up they became, they'd always have a place at my table. They arrived together, arms linked, faces flushed from the autumn chill. Emily handed me a bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite, and Daniel gave me a quick hug, his embrace lingering just a second longer than usual. I remember thinking how happy they looked, how perfectly they fit together. We settled into our usual rhythm, chatter about work, stories from the week, laughter that bubbled up easily. For a while, everything felt right, almost idyllic. As we finished dessert, I found myself glancing at Emily's left hand, noticing the delicate band that now adorned her finger. My heart skipped a beat. I'd seen her wear rings before, but this one was different, simple, elegant, unmistakably meaningful. I smiled, feeling a rush of excitement. Maybe this was it? Maybe they were finally ready to share their plans. Trying to sound casual, I asked, "So, have you two set a date yet? When's the big day?" I expected a flurry of excitement, maybe a little blushing, the start of a conversation about venues and dresses and guest lists. Instead, Emily's smile faltered, her eyes darting to Daniel. He looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by the crumbs left behind. Emily cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. "Actually, we got married yesterday." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd said. Married yesterday? I stared at her, then at Daniel, waiting for someone to laugh, to tell me it was a joke. But there was no laughter, no punchline, just silence, thick and suffocating. I felt the room spin, my breath catching in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could they have gotten married without telling me? Without telling anyone? I thought of all the dreams I'd held for them, all the plans I'd made in my mind. In an instant, they crumbled, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes pleading for understanding. "Mom, we didn't want to hurt you. It just felt right. We wanted something simple, just the two of us." His words stung more than I expected. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, determined not to fall apart in front of them. I forced a smile, but I could feel it trembling, fragile and false. I wanted to ask why. Why would they do this? Why would they shut me out of one of the most important moments of their lives? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make them see how much this hurt. But all I could manage was a quiet, "Oh, I see." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I went through the motions, clearing plates, offering coffee, making small talk. But my mind was elsewhere, lost in a storm of confusion and disbelief. I watched them from across the table, searching for clues, for any sign that this was all a terrible mistake. As they left, Daniel hugged me again, holding on a little tighter this time. Emily thanked me for dinner, her voice soft and apologetic. I stood at the door, watching them walk away, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on me. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the conversation over and over, searching for answers that wouldn't come. I thought of the wedding I'd dreamed of, the memories we'd never make, the empty space where joy should have been. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alone, adrift in a reality I never saw coming. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted by the memory of that dinner. The words, "We got married yesterday," echoing in my mind like a bell I couldn't unring. I tried to go about my daily routines, watering the plants, folding laundry, chatting with neighbors, but everything felt off-kilter, as if the world had shifted beneath my feet and I was the only one who noticed. I kept replaying the evening in my head, searching for clues, for any sign that might explain how I'd missed something so monumental. It was only then, in the quiet aftermath, that I began to see the cracks in the story I'd told myself. Little moments that once seemed innocent now took on a different hue, colored by suspicion and doubt. I remembered the times Daniel had canceled our weekly coffee dates at the last minute. Always with a vague excuse, work ran late, he wasn't feeling well. Something had come up with Emily. I'd brushed it off, telling myself he was busy, that young people had their own lives to lead. But now, I wondered if those missed meetings were more than just coincidence. There were the phone calls that ended abruptly when I answered, the texts that went unanswered for hours, sometimes days. I'd always prided myself on giving Daniel space, on not being the kind of mother who hovered or demanded constant attention. But now I questioned whether my distance had allowed a wall to grow between us, one I hadn't even noticed until it was too late. I thought back to the last family gathering, a Sunday lunch just a few weeks before their secret wedding. Emily had seemed distracted, her smile a little too tight, her laughter a beat too late. Daniel kept glancing at her, as if seeking reassurance, and when I asked about their plans for the holidays, they exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. At the time, I chalked it up to nerves or maybe a private joke, but now it felt like something more, a secret shared between them, one I wasn't meant to know. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many little things I'd overlooked. The way Emily avoided conversations about the future, always steering the topic back to the present. The way Daniel hesitated when I asked about their engagement, offering only vague answers about taking things slow and not rushing into anything. I remembered the time I offered to help Emily shop for a wedding dress, and she politely declined, saying she hadn't even started looking yet. I'd believed her, trusting that when the time was right, she'd let me in, but trust, I was learning, could be a fragile thing. It was built on a foundation of shared moments, open conversations, and the belief that those you love will let you into their lives. Now, that foundation felt shaky, riddled with cracks I hadn't seen until the whole structure came tumbling down. I started to question everything. Was there something about me that made them keep their distance? Had I been too eager to involve too much? Or was there something else, something darker, that they were hiding? My mind spun with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Maybe they thought I wouldn't approve of their choices. Maybe they wanted to avoid the chaos of a big family wedding. Or maybe, worst of all, they simply didn't want me there. The contrast between the love I felt for Daniel and the secrecy that now surrounded him was almost unbearable. I'd always believed that our bond was unbreakable, that no matter what happened, we'd face it together. But now, I felt like an outsider in my own family, shut out of the most important moment of my son's life. I tried to talk to friends, to seek comfort in their words, but even that felt hollow. Some told me not to take it personally, that young people do things differently these days. Others suggested I confront Daniel and demand answers. But I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the truth. Not if it meant facing the possibility that I'd somehow failed him. At night, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every missed call, every awkward silence. I remembered the way Daniel used to confide in me, sharing his hopes and fears, asking for advice on everything from school projects to first dates. When had that changed? When had he stopped seeing me as his confidant and started seeing me as someone to keep at arm's length? I thought about Emily, too, and the way she'd always seemed a little guarded around me. I'd tried so hard to make her feel welcome, to show her that she was part of our family. But maybe I'd missed something, some unspoken worry, some fear that I'd never truly accept her. Or maybe she and Daniel had their own reasons I couldn't begin to understand. The tension between what I wanted to believe and what I now suspected gnawed at me, day and night. I wanted to trust them, to believe that their decision had nothing to do with me. But the secrecy, the lies by omission, made it impossible to ignore the growing distance between us. I found myself watching for signs, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for the truth hidden beneath the surface. I wondered what else they might be hiding, what other secrets lay buried just out of reach. The uncertainty was maddening, a constant ache that refused to fade. In the end, I was left with more questions than answers, my faith in our family shaken to its core. I wanted to believe that love would be enough to bridge the gap, to heal the wounds left by their betrayal. But as the days passed and the silence grew, I couldn't help but wonder if some secrets were too big to overcome, and if the family I'd worked so hard to build was slipping through my fingers, one hidden truth at a time. In the quiet hours of the night, when the house is still and the only sound is the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, I find myself drifting back through the years, searching for comfort in memories that now feel bittersweet. I close my eyes and see Daniel as a little boy, his hair tousled from sleep, his cheeks flushed with excitement as he bounded into my room on Saturday mornings. "Wake up, Mommy! Pancakes!" he'd shout, his laughter filling the house with a joy so pure it made my heart ache. I remember the way he'd cling to my hand on the first day of kindergarten, his small fingers trusting and warm in mine, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. I was his safe place, his anchor in a world that sometimes felt too big. Those early years were a blur of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and whispered secrets under blanket forts. I was there for every milestone, his first lost tooth, his first school play, the day he learned to ride a bike without training wheels. I cheered the loudest at his soccer games, wiped away his tears after heartbreaks, and celebrated every victory, no matter how small. Our bond was something I cherished, a thread woven through every chapter of our lives. As Daniel grew older, our relationship changed, but the closeness remained. He became more independent, more private, but he still came to me for advice, for comfort, for reassurance. I remember the night he called me from college, his voice trembling as he confessed he was struggling with classes and feeling lost. I stayed on the phone with him for hours, listening, encouraging, reminding him that he was never alone. I thought those moments would last forever, that no matter how much he grew, he'd always need his mother. When he brought Emily home for the first time, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I wanted so badly for her to feel welcome, to see our home as her own. I remember fussing over the dinner menu, making sure to include her favorite dishes, and setting the table with my best china. Emily was polite, a little shy, but there was a kindness in her eyes that put me at ease. I watched the way Daniel looked at her, the way his whole face lit up when she laughed, and I knew she was special. I hoped she'd see me as more than just Daniel's mother. I wanted to be a friend, a confidant, someone she could turn to. Over time, I let myself dream about their future. I imagined helping Emily pick out a wedding dress, standing beside her as she became part of our family. I pictured Daniel waiting at the altar, his eyes shining with love and anticipation. I saw myself dancing with him at the reception, holding him close as we celebrated the start of his new life. I wanted to be there for every moment, to share in their happiness, to witness the next chapter of our family's story. But now, those dreams feel like fragile glass, shattered by the reality of their secret wedding. I can't help but wonder what I did wrong, what I missed. Was I too involved, too eager, too much? Or was I not enough? Never quite the mother Daniel needed, never quite the mother-in-law Emily wanted. The questions swirl in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. I think about the family gatherings we've shared over the years, the laughter, the stories, the sense of belonging that I worked so hard to create. I remember the Christmas mornings spent in pajamas, unwrapping gifts by the fire, the Thanksgiving dinners where we crowded around the table, grateful for another year together. I wanted those traditions to continue, to grow, to include Emily and any future grandchildren. I wanted our family to be a source of strength and comfort, a place where everyone felt seen and loved. Now, I feel a sense of loss that goes beyond missing a wedding. It's the loss of trust, of connection, of the belief that I was an essential part of Daniel's life. I feel betrayed, not just by their secrecy, but by the realization that I may not be as important to them as I thought. There's an ache in my chest, a longing for the closeness we once shared, and a fear that it may never return. I try to remind myself of the good times, to hold on to the memories that made our family strong. I remember the way Daniel used to hug me goodnight, the way he'd call just to say he loved me, the way he'd look to me for guidance. I remember the pride I felt watching him grow into a kind, compassionate man, the hope I felt when he found someone to share his life with. I want to believe that those moments still matter, that our bond isn't broken beyond repair. But the doubt lingers, whispering that things have changed, that I've been left behind. I wonder if Emily ever truly felt at home with us, if Daniel ever felt torn between the woman who raised him and the woman he loves. I wonder if I'll ever get the chance to make things right, to rebuild the trust that's been lost. In the darkness, I cling to hope, fragile as it may be. I tell myself that love is resilient, that families can heal, that forgiveness is possible. But for now, I sit with my memories, my regrets, and my longing, searching for a way forward in a world that suddenly feels unfamiliar and cold. I couldn't keep the questions bottled up any longer. The ache in my chest had grown too heavy, the silence between us too loud. After days of restless nights and endless replaying of every moment, I called Daniel and Emily and asked them to come over. My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling, torn between hope and dread. I needed to know why. I needed to hear it from them, to understand what had driven them to shut me out of their lives in such a profound way. They arrived on a rainy Saturday afternoon, the sky gray and heavy, mirroring the mood in my heart. I'd set out tea and cookies, a feeble attempt at normalcy, but the air was thick with tension. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly, while Emily perched beside him, her eyes fixed on the floor. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and then I asked the question that had haunted me since that night. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you get married without your family? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window. Finally, Daniel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. Mom, it wasn't about you. We wanted something simple. We didn't want a big fuss. I felt my temper flare, the pain twisting into anger. A big fuss? Daniel, this isn't about a party. This is about family, about being there for each other. You know how much this meant to me. How could you just leave us out? Emily's voice was soft, but there was a firmness beneath it. We didn't want to hurt you, Linda. We just wanted it to be about us, not about everyone else's expectations. I stared at her, struggling to keep my composure. Expectations? All I ever wanted was to celebrate with you, to welcome you into our family. Was that so wrong? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched across his face. Mom, you have to understand, every time we talked about the wedding, it turned into something bigger than we wanted. Guest lists, venues, traditions. It was overwhelming. We just wanted something quiet, something that felt like us. I felt the sting of his words, the implication that my dreams for them had become a burden. So you decided to cut us out completely? To keep it a secret? Emily finally looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It wasn't just about the wedding, Linda. It was about everything. I've always felt like I was on the outside, like I could never quite fit in. I know you tried, but sometimes it felt like there was a right way and a wrong way to be part of this family, and I was always getting it wrong. Her words hit me like a slap. I thought I'd been welcoming, that I'd made her feel at home. But now I saw the cracks, the moments I'd missed, the times I'd pushed too hard or held on too tightly. I wanted to protest, to defend myself, but the pain in her voice stopped me. Daniel reached for her hand, his own voice trembling. We just wanted to start our life together on our own terms. We didn't want to hurt anyone, but we needed to do this for us. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the truth settled between us. I thought of all the times I'd insisted on family traditions, all the ways I'd tried to make things perfect, never realizing that my idea of perfect might not be theirs. I felt a wave of guilt, mingled with resentment. Why hadn't they just told me how they felt? Why had they chosen secrecy over honesty? The conversation grew heated, voices rising as old wounds resurfaced. I brought up the times Daniel had pulled away, the missed calls, the vague answers. He accused me of not listening, of always needing things to be my way. Emily admitted she'd felt judged, that she'd worried she'd never measure up to my expectations. I tried to explain that my intentions were good, that I only wanted to help, but the words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. At some point, Daniel's younger sister, Rachel, who had come by to return a borrowed book, walked in on the argument. She took one look at our faces and immediately demanded to know what was going on. When I told her, her reaction was swift and sharp. "You got married without us? Without Mom?" Her voice cracked, and I saw the hurt in her eyes, the same hurt I felt. She turned on me too, accusing me of always making everything about myself, of smothering Daniel and never giving Emily a chance to breathe. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Years of unspoken grievances spilled out, resentments about childhood favoritism, about feeling left out, about the pressure to live up to family expectations. I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by a tide of pain and anger that I hadn't seen coming. In the midst of it all, my husband, Mark, who had been listening quietly from the kitchen, finally spoke up. His voice was calm but firm. "Enough, we're a family. We've all made mistakes, but yelling at each other isn't going to fix anything." He looked at me, his eyes gentle but sad. "Linda, I know how much this hurts, but maybe we need to listen, really listen, to what Daniel and Emily are saying." His words cut through the noise, and for a moment, there was silence. I looked at my son, at the young man I'd raised, and saw not a child, but an adult trying to find his own way. I looked at Emily, her face streaked with tears, and realized how hard she'd tried to belong. I saw Rachel, arms crossed, her own pain raw and exposed. And I saw myself, clinging to the past, afraid to let go. The pain in my heart was sharper than ever, but beneath it was a flicker of understanding. Maybe I hadn't been listening as closely as I thought. Maybe I'd been so focused on my own dreams that I'd missed theirs. The realization was humbling, and it hurt more than I could say. As the rain continued to fall outside, we sat together in the living room, the storm inside us finally beginning to quiet. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But for the first time I saw the truth, not just of their choices, but of my own. The secrets that led to their wedding were born of fear, of wanting to belong, of needing to be seen and heard. And as much as it hurt, I knew that if we were ever going to heal, we'd have to face those truths together, no matter how painful they might be. The days after our confrontation passed in a haze. I replayed every word, every accusation, every tearful confession. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to distract myself with chores, with errands, but my mind kept circling back to the same questions. Had I really been so blind? Had my love become a burden? Was there something deeper I'd missed all along? It was Rachel who finally broke the silence. She called me one evening, her voice hesitant but determined. "Mom, can I come over? I think we need to talk." I agreed, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and hope. When she arrived, she didn't waste time with small talk. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and looked me straight in the eye. "Mom, I know you're hurting. We all are, but there's something you need to understand about Daniel and Emily. It's not just about the wedding. It's about how things have felt in this family for a long time." I braced myself, unsure what was coming. Rachel took a deep breath. "Do you remember when Daniel was in high school and he started dating that girl, Melissa? You didn't like her. You made it pretty clear. You said you were just looking out for him, but he felt judged. He told me once that he was afraid to bring anyone home after that, afraid you'd never approve." Her words hit me like a wave. I remembered Melissa, how I'd worried she was a bad influence, how I'd tried to steer Daniel away from her. I'd told myself I was protecting him, but now I saw how my actions might have felt to him. I felt a pang of guilt, sharper than before. Rachel continued, her voice softer now. "Emily knew about that," Daniel told her. "And then, when you started planning their wedding before they'd even set a date, it made them both feel like they didn't have a say, like it was your wedding, not theirs. I'm not saying you meant to hurt them, Mom, but sometimes you hold on so tight that it's hard for anyone to breathe." I sat in stunned silence. the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. I thought I'd been loving, supportive, involved, but maybe I'd crossed a line, turning my hopes for my children into expectations they felt they could never meet. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They love you, Mom, but they needed to do this their way. They were scared you'd be disappointed or that you'd try to take over, so they kept it a secret. It wasn't about shutting you out. It was about protecting themselves." The contrast between hope and despair was almost unbearable. On one hand, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. That Daniel and Emily hadn't acted out of malice, but out of fear and self-preservation. On the other hand, I felt the weight of despair, the realization that my own actions, however well-intentioned, had helped drive a wedge between us. I thought back to my own mother, how she'd sometimes smothered me with her love, how I'd longed for independence, but never quite found the courage to claim it. Was I repeating the same patterns, passing down the same wounds? The thought made my chest ache. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the truth. I saw now that love could be suffocating, that good intentions could pave the way to heartbreak. I saw how my need to be involved, to be needed, had blinded me to what Daniel and Emily truly wanted. I saw how fear of judgment, fear of disappointment had shaped their choices, just as it had shaped mine. But I also saw a path forward, however narrow and uncertain. If I could find the courage to let go, to truly listen, maybe we could begin to heal. Maybe there was still hope for reconciliation, for rebuilding the trust that had been broken. Or maybe the damage was too deep, the wounds too raw, and we would drift further apart, each of us nursing our own regrets. The next morning, I called Daniel. My voice shook, but I forced myself to speak honestly. "I'm sorry," I said. "I see now that I've made mistakes. I held on too tight. I wanted so much for you to be happy that I forgot to ask what you wanted. I hope you can forgive me. I want to understand. I want to do better." There was a long pause, and then Daniel's voice, quiet but full of emotion. "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot. We never wanted to hurt you. We just needed to find our own way." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead would not be easy, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time, I felt the possibility of healing, of moving forward. Not as the mother who controlled everything, but as someone willing to learn, to change, to let go. Hope and despair, side by side. The future uncertain, but not yet lost. The days that followed were some of the loneliest I've ever known. The house, once filled with laughter and the comforting chaos of family, felt hollow and cold. I wandered from room to room, picking up stray mugs and folding blankets, searching for some sense of normalcy, but everything seemed out of place. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional ring of my phone, usually a robocall or a neighbor checking in. Never Daniel or Emily. I tried to keep busy, telling myself that time would heal the wounds, but the ache in my chest only grew heavier. I found myself replaying every conversation, every decision, every moment I might have pushed too hard or said the wrong thing. I questioned my worth as a mother, wondering if I'd failed at the one thing that mattered most. Was I too controlling? Too eager? Or simply not enough? The doubts circled endlessly, each one sharper than the last. Family gatherings became awkward, strained affairs. Rachel stopped by less often, her visits short and filled with uncomfortable silences. When she did come, she avoided talking about Daniel and Emily, as if the very mention of their names might shatter what little peace remained. My husband, Mark, tried to bridge the gap, suggesting we invite everyone over for dinner. But the invitations were met with polite refusals or vague promises to get together soon. The empty seats at the table were a constant reminder of what we'd lost. I missed milestones I'd always dreamed of sharing. I didn't get to see Daniel and Emily's first dance as husband and wife. Didn't get to toast their future or slip a family heirloom into Emily's hand for something old. I didn't get to help plan, to fuss over details, to be part of the memories that would shape their marriage. Instead, I was left with a handful of photos sent by text, grainy images of a courthouse ceremony, Daniel in a simple suit, Emily in a plain dress, both smiling, but somehow distant. I stared at those pictures for hours, searching for clues, for some sign that they'd thought of me, missed me, wished I'd been there. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with regrets and what-ifs. I remembered the nights when Daniel was little, how he'd crawl into bed with me after a nightmare, his small body pressed close, his trust absolute. Now I was the one haunted by bad dreams, longing for comfort that never came. I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he missed our talks, our traditions, the bond we once shared. Even the simplest routines felt heavy. Grocery shopping became a minefield, passing the bakery where I used to buy Daniel's favorite cookies, the florist where I'd imagined picking out wedding flowers with Emily. I avoided friends at the store, not wanting to answer questions or see the pity in their eyes. I felt exposed, as if everyone could see the cracks in my family. The failure I carried like a scar. Mark tried to reassure me, telling me that families go through rough patches, that things would get better with time. But I saw the worry in his eyes, the way he lingered in the doorway after work, as if bracing himself for another evening of silence. We talked less, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own grief. The distance between us grew, a quiet chasm neither of us knew how to cross. I found myself withdrawing from the world, turning down invitations, skipping church, letting calls go to voicemail. I told myself I needed space, but the truth was, I was ashamed. Ashamed of the rift in my family, ashamed of my own mistakes, ashamed of the emptiness that had crept into my life. I felt invisible, irrelevant, as if the world had moved on without me. The lowest point came one evening when I sat alone at the kitchen table, a single place setting in front of me, the rest of the house dark and silent. I stared at my reflection in the window, searching for the woman I used to be, the mother who believed in family, in love, in second chances. I wondered if she was gone for good, or if there was still a way back. In that moment, I realized how easy it is to lose yourself in grief, to let pain define you. I saw how the fractures in my family had become fractures in my own heart, how the longing for connection had turned into a wall of loneliness. I didn't know how to fix what was broken, or if it could even be fixed. All I knew was that I couldn't go on like this, not as a shadow of myself, not as a mother who had given up hope. The turning point came quietly, almost imperceptibly, after weeks of drifting through my days like a ghost. One morning, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. I stared at the steam curling upward and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd truly tasted anything. I was tired of feeling sorry for myself, tired of the silence, tired of waiting for someone else to make the first move. I knew deep down that if I wanted things to change, I had to be the one to take the first step. I started by reaching out to an old friend, Susan, someone who'd weathered her own share of family storms. We met for coffee, and as I poured out my heart, she listened without judgment. When I finished, she squeezed my hand and said, "Linda, you can't change the past, but you can choose what you do next. If you want your family back, you have to show them you're willing to listen, to forgive, to start over. It won't be easy, but it's worth it." Her words echoed in my mind for days. I also made an appointment with a therapist, hoping for some guidance. Sitting in that small, softly lit office, I spoke honestly about my regrets, my fears, and my longing for connection. The therapist helped me see that love sometimes means letting go of control, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself as much as others. She encouraged me to reach out, not with demands or expectations, but with vulnerability and an open heart. So I sat down at my desk, pen in hand, and began to write. I poured everything I was feeling onto the page, my sorrow, my regret, my hope for healing. I told Daniel and Emily how much I missed them, how sorry I was for the ways I'd hurt them, even unintentionally. I wrote about the dreams I'd had for their wedding, but also about my desire to support their choices, to be part of their lives in whatever way they needed. I promised to listen, to learn, to let them lead. I ended the letter with a simple truth. I love you both, and I want us to find our way back to each other. I'm here whenever you're ready. I slipped the letter into an envelope and mailed it, my hands trembling as I let it go. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things could change. But I didn't stop there. I decided to make a gesture, something tangible to show my willingness to start fresh. I began planning a small family dinner, nothing elaborate, just a simple meal with everyone's favorite dishes. I called Rachel and Mark, asking for their help. Rachel was hesitant at first, but when I told her about the letter, she softened. "It's a good idea, Mom. Even if they say no, at least they'll know you're trying." I spent the next few days preparing, pouring my love into every detail. I set the table with the good china, arranged fresh flowers, and cooked the recipes that had always brought us together. I left a message for Daniel and Emily, inviting them to dinner. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door and a hope for reconciliation. As the day approached, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. I rehearsed what I might say, reminding myself to listen more than I spoke, to let go of old hurts and focus on the future. I knew the conversation would be difficult, that there were wounds still raw and words still unspoken. But I also knew that healing had to start somewhere, and I was ready to take that risk. The night before the dinner, I stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at the table set for 4, and allowed myself to hope. Maybe things wouldn't go back to the way they were. Maybe they shouldn't. But perhaps, with honesty and patience, we could build something new, something stronger. I thought of the letter, the dinner, the small acts of courage it had taken to reach out, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. I went to bed that night with a prayer on my lips, not for things to be perfect, but for the strength to keep trying, to keep loving, even when it hurt. I knew the road ahead would be uncertain, that forgiveness and trust would take time. But as I drifted off to sleep, I felt hope flicker in the darkness, a gentle reminder that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal, one honest conversation at a time. The day of the dinner arrived with a nervous energy that buzzed through the house. I woke early, unable to sleep, and busied myself in the kitchen, kneading dough, chopping vegetables, and checking the clock every few minutes. Mark tried to reassure me with a gentle squeeze of my shoulder, but I could see the worry in his eyes too. Rachel arrived first, offering to help set the table. We worked in silence at first, the air thick with anticipation, until she finally said, "No matter what happens tonight, I'm proud of you for trying." "Mom." Her words steadied me and I nodded, grateful for her support. As the afternoon faded into evening, I found myself glancing out the window, searching for any sign of Daniel and Emily. My heart pounded with every passing car, every footstep on the sidewalk. I told myself I would be okay if they didn't come, but the truth was, I needed them to walk through that door. I needed to see their faces, to know that there was still a chance for us. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and took a deep breath before opening the door. There they stood, Daniel, looking older and more tired than I remembered, and Emily, her eyes wary but hopeful. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Daniel managed a small, nervous smile. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, my voice trembling. "Come in. I'm so glad you're here." We gathered around the table, the 4 of us, the meal spread out before us like a peace offering. Conversation started tentatively, with small talk about work and the weather, but the tension was palpable. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us, threatening to smother the fragile hope I'd worked so hard to nurture. Finally, after the plates had been cleared and the coffee poured, I knew it was time. I looked at Daniel and Emily, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know things have been difficult. I want you to know how much I appreciate you being here." Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on his mug. Emily reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, willing myself to be brave. "I sent you that letter because I needed you to know how sorry I am. I see now that I made mistakes, big ones. I held on too tightly, tried to make things perfect, and in doing so, I didn't listen to what you needed. I'm so sorry for the ways I hurt you, even if I didn't mean to." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Daniel looked up, his eyes shining with tears. "Mom, I know you meant well. I know you love us. But sometimes it felt like you didn't trust us to make our own choices. I was scared to disappoint you. I didn't want to hurt you. but I also didn't know how to tell you what we needed. Emily's voice was soft but steady. I always wanted to be part of this family, Linda, but sometimes I felt like I was just a guest, like I had to earn my place. I was afraid that if we did things our way, you'd never accept me. When we decided to get married quietly, it wasn't to hurt you. It was because we were scared. We needed to do it for ourselves, but I wish we'd found a way to include you. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I listened, the pain and regret mingling with relief. I wish you had too. I wish I'd made it easier for you to come to me. I see now that love isn't about control or tradition. It's about trust and letting go and believing in each other. I want to do better. I want to be part of your lives in whatever way you'll have me. Rachel, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. We all made mistakes. I was angry too, but I see now that we were all just trying to protect ourselves. Maybe it's time we start protecting each other instead. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt as if the whole world had stopped spinning. Then Daniel reached across the table and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. I love you, Mom. I never stopped. I just needed you to see me, not as your little boy, but as the man I'm trying to become. Emily wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. And I want to be part of this family, truly. I want to make new memories, together. The dam broke then, and we all found ourselves crying, the years of hurt and misunderstanding washing away in a flood of forgiveness. Mark joined us, his arms wrapping around us all, and for the first time in months, I felt whole again. We talked late into the night, sharing stories, airing old grievances, and making promises to do better. We laughed through our tears, finding comfort in the honesty that had been missing for so long. It wasn't easy. There were still wounds to heal, still trust to rebuild, but for the first time, I believed it was possible. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you for not giving up on us." Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with hope. Rachel smiled, her own pain softened by the promise of a new beginning. After they left, I stood in the doorway, watching them walk down the path together, their hands entwined. The night air was cool, but I felt a warmth in my heart that I hadn't known in a long time. We had faced our pain, spoken our truths, and found our way back to each other. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but it was real. And that, I realized, was all I had ever wanted. As I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to bed, I felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I knew there would be more hard conversations, more moments of doubt and fear. But I also knew that we had taken the first step toward healing, together. And in that moment, I allowed myself to hope, not just for forgiveness, but for a future filled with love, honesty, and the kind of family we could all be proud of. The morning after our dinner, I woke to a sense of quiet relief, as if the air in the house had shifted. The heaviness that had pressed on my chest for weeks was lighter, replaced by a cautious hope. I moved through my morning routine with a new gentleness, savoring the small things, a warm cup of tea, the sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, the memory of Daniel's hug still lingering on my shoulders. The days that followed were filled with tentative steps, each one a small act of faith. Daniel called the next afternoon, just to check in. Our conversation was awkward at first, but there was a softness in his voice I hadn't heard in months. We talked about nothing and everything, work, the weather, a new recipe I wanted to try. It wasn't the easy closeness we once shared, but it was a beginning. Emily sent me a text later that week, thanking me for the dinner and for my letter. She wrote, "I hope we can start fresh. I want to get to know you, Linda, not just as Daniel's mom, but as a person." Her words touched me deeply. I realized how little I'd truly seen her, how much I'd focused on my own vision of family instead of making space for hers. I replied with honesty, telling her I wanted the same and that I was ready to listen. Rachel, too, seemed lighter. She stopped by more often, sometimes just to sit with me in comfortable silence, sometimes to talk about her own life. We found ourselves laughing together again, the tension between us easing as we both let go of old resentments. Mark and I talked late into the night, sharing our fears and hopes, promising to support each other as we navigated this new chapter. We all agreed to take things slowly, to respect each other's boundaries. I resisted the urge to plan or control, reminding myself that love doesn't mean orchestrating every detail. Instead, I focused on being present, on listening, on letting Daniel and Emily set the pace. When they invited us over for dinner at their apartment, I accepted with gratitude, bringing only a small bouquet of flowers and an open heart. That evening, I watched as Daniel and Emily moved around their kitchen together, laughing and teasing each other. And I saw them not as children, but as partners building a life. I felt a pang of loss for the years slipping by, but also a surge of pride. They were finding their way, and I was learning to let them. We talked openly about what had happened, about the pain and misunderstandings, about the ways we'd all contributed to the rift. There were tears, but also forgiveness. We set new boundaries, promising to speak honestly, to ask for what we needed, to give each other space to grow. It wasn't always easy. Old habits die hard, and there were moments when I caught myself slipping back into old patterns. But each time, I reminded myself of the lessons I'd learned. That love is not about control, but about trust. That letting go is not a loss, but a gift. I found myself reflecting often on the journey we'd taken. I saw now how my desire to create the perfect family had blinded me to the needs and desires of those I loved most. Role as a mother was changing, that my children needed me to step back so they could step forward. It was a bittersweet truth, but one I was learning to accept. I also learned to forgive myself. I stopped replaying every mistake, every harsh word, every missed sign. I reminded myself that I had acted out of love, even when I got it wrong. I gave myself permission to be imperfect, to grow, to change. As the weeks turned into months, our family found a new rhythm. We celebrated small victories, a shared meal, a heartfelt conversation, a moment of laughter. We honored each other's boundaries, but also reached out when it mattered. The wounds were still there, but they were healing, slowly and surely. Looking back, I saw how far we'd come, not just from the pain of the secret wedding, but from the patterns that had held us all captive. I saw the strength in my children, the resilience in my marriage, the possibility of new beginnings. I saw that love, real love, is messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it is also the force that brings us back to each other, again and again. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and fear. But I also knew that we had learned how to find our way through the darkness together. And in that knowledge, I found peace, a quiet, steady faith in the family we were becoming, one honest conversation at a time. With each passing week, I felt myself changing in ways I hadn't expected. The pain of the past months didn't vanish overnight, but it softened, making room for something new, a sense of empowerment I hadn't known I was missing. I realized that letting go didn't mean losing my family. It meant trusting them and myself enough to allow us all to grow. I started to see Daniel and Emily not just as my son and daughter-in-law, but as adults with their own dreams, struggles, and strengths. I made a conscious effort to support them without hovering, to offer advice only when asked, and to celebrate their choices, even when they differed from my own. I found joy in their independence, pride in their resilience, and a quiet satisfaction in watching them build a life together on their own terms. One Saturday, Emily invited me to join her at a local art fair. It was something I never would have thought to do on my own, but I said yes, eager to share in her interests. We wandered through the stalls, admiring paintings and pottery, sipping coffee and talking about everything from favorite books to childhood memories. For the first time, I felt like I was getting to know her as a person, not just as Daniel's wife. We laughed together, and I saw a warmth in her eyes that told me she was beginning to trust me, too. Daniel and I found new ways to connect as well. We started a tradition of Sunday morning walks in the park, just the two of us. Sometimes we talked about big things, work, marriage, dreams for the future. Other times, we simply enjoyed the quiet, the comfort of being together without the pressure of saying the right thing. I learned to listen more, to let him lead the conversation, to accept that our relationship would keep evolving as he did. As a family, we began to create new traditions. Instead of the elaborate holiday gatherings I used to orchestrate, We opted for smaller, more meaningful celebrations. Thanksgiving became a potluck, with everyone bringing a favorite dish. Christmas morning was spent in pajamas, exchanging simple gifts and sharing stories over cinnamon rolls. We started a monthly family night, rotating who hosted and what we did, sometimes a movie, sometimes board games, sometimes just a long dinner filled with laughter and stories. I found myself looking forward to these moments, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. There was space for everyone to be themselves, to speak honestly, to show up as they were. The pressure to perform, to meet some impossible standard of family, faded away. In its place was a sense of belonging, of acceptance, of love that was both fierce and gentle. Outside of family, I began to rediscover parts of myself I'd neglected. I joined a book club at the library, started volunteering at the community garden, and even signed up for a painting class. I made new friends, found new passions, and realized that my life could be full and rich, even as my role as a mother changed. I felt lighter, more confident, more at peace with who I was and who I was becoming. Mark and I grew closer too. We spent more time together, exploring new hobbies, taking weekend trips, and simply enjoying each other's company. We talked openly about our hopes and fears, supporting each other as we navigated this new chapter. Our marriage, once strained by unspoken worries, became a source of strength and comfort. Looking ahead, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. I knew there would be challenges. No family is without them. But I also knew we had the tools to face them together. We had learned to communicate, to forgive, to let go of old hurts and embrace new beginnings. We had learned that love is not about holding on, but about lifting each other up, even when it means stepping back. I was no longer defined by my role as a mother alone. I was a woman with her own dreams, her own joys, her own life. I was proud of the family we were building, proud of the person I was becoming. I had found empowerment not in control, but in acceptance, in the courage to change, to grow, to love without fear. As I watched Daniel and Emily move forward together, as I laughed with Rachel and held Mark's hand, I felt a deep, abiding gratitude. We were not the same family we once were, but we were stronger, more honest, more connected. And in that truth, I found a happiness I never could have imagined. A happiness born not of perfection, but of love, resilience, and the willingness to begin again. As I settled into this new chapter of my life, I realized how much I craved connection beyond the walls of my own home. The journey through heartbreak and healing had been so isolating at times, but I knew I couldn't be the only one who had struggled with family rifts and the pain of letting go. I wanted to find others who understood, who could offer wisdom, comfort, and maybe even a little hope. I started small, reaching out to Susan, my old friend who had first encouraged me to open my heart. Over coffee, we shared stories of our families, the good, the bad, and the messy in between. She listened without judgment, and I found myself doing the same for her. Our conversations became a lifeline, a reminder that none of us have all the answers, and that sometimes just being heard is enough. Encouraged by this, I joined an online support group for parents navigating adult children's independence. At first, I was hesitant to share, worried my story would sound petty or self-indulgent. But as I read post after post from mothers and fathers who had felt left out, misunderstood, or afraid of losing their children, I realized how universal these feelings were. I wrote about my experience, the shock of Daniel and Emily's secret wedding, the pain of feeling excluded, the slow, hard work of rebuilding trust. The responses were immediate and heartfelt. Strangers from across the country offered empathy, advice, and their own stories of reconciliation and hope. I found strength in this community, in the knowledge that I was not alone. We celebrated each other's victories, no matter how small. A phone call from a distant child, a peaceful family dinner, a moment of honest conversation. We comforted each other through setbacks, reminding ourselves that healing is rarely a straight line. Through these connections, I learned to see my own journey with more compassion. I realized that every family has its struggles, its secrets, its moments of pain and forgiveness. I began to offer advice to others, sharing what I had learned about listening, letting go, and loving without conditions. In helping others, I found my own wounds healing, my own heart growing stronger. Most of all, I discovered that community is not just about shared experiences, but about shared hope. The belief that, no matter how broken things may seem, there is always a way forward. And in that solidarity, I found the courage to keep moving, to keep loving, and to keep believing in the power of family in all its imperfect, beautiful forms. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that family isn't defined by perfect moments or flawless traditions. It's shaped by forgiveness, by the willingness to grow, and by the courage to keep reaching out, even when it hurts. I've learned that letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means making space for new beginnings, for honest conversations, and for the kind of love that allows each of us to become who we're meant to be. Looking back, I see now that every tear, every argument, and every moment of doubt was part of a larger story, a story of transformation. I'm not the same mother I was before, and our family isn't the same either. But in many ways we're stronger. We've learned to listen, to apologize, and to forgive. We've learned that it's okay to set boundaries, to ask for what we need, and to accept that sometimes the people we love will make choices we don't understand. And that's all right, because love, at its core, is about trust and acceptance. If you're watching this and you've faced your own family struggles, I want you to know you're not alone. Healing takes time, and it's rarely a straight path. But every step you take, no matter how small, matters. I invite you to share your own story in the comments below. What have you learned about forgiveness, about letting go, or about finding your way back to the people you love? Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs today. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world to me, and it helps us build a community where we can all learn and grow together. And if you're curious about what comes next, about the lessons I'm still learning, the new traditions we're creating, and the ways our family continues to evolve, make sure to stay tuned. There are more stories to tell, more wisdom to share, and more hope to be found. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in the power of family, even when it's messy and complicated. Together, we can turn even the hardest chapters into stories of hope, healing, and love.